This presentation accompanies the guidance notes for the Women's Empowerment in Fisheries and Aquaculture Index. This presentation will consist of 5 parts. We'll start with a short overview of what the index is, the WEFI, and it will then go into the quantitative methods of the WEFI. We will then explain the qualitative methods of the WEFI, and then how these two should be brought together or can be brought together, and how they can be used. And then finally, we will finish with a bit of looking ahead and additional resources that can be looked at. So what is the Women's Empowerment in Fisheries and Aquaculture Index? So women play a critical role in fisheries and aquaculture growth and transformation in developing countries, but they face persistent obstacles and constraints limiting their further inclusion in fisheries and aquaculture contexts. So the Women's Empowerment in Fisheries and Aquaculture Index, or the WEFI for short, was developed to track changes in women's empowerment levels. The index is based on the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, which was a significant innovation in its field as a composite measurement tool that can identify disempowered women and men and understand how to increase empowerment in key domains and track progress towards empowerment. The WEFI will be used for performance monitoring within WorldFish projects, but it can also be used by other organizations and as a tool for policymakers, research, and also implementers and academics seeking to measure and increase women's empowerment in the fisheries and aquaculture context. And it also allows projects to track the so-called reach, benefit, empower, transform framework, which are outcomes for women in fisheries and aquaculture projects. So how was the WEFI developed? This was a collaboration in partnership between WorldFish, Kidd Royal Tropical Institute, and Katie Sproul, an independent consultant and gender index expert. Some versions of the WEFI were already used previously in several contexts, for example, Zambia and Bangladesh, before this version of the WEFI was developed. And it's therefore, it draws on those tools, but those tools in turn draw largely on the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, which was developed by IFPRI, but is tailored to aquaculture and fisheries contexts. And besides that, also captures information on agriculture. The quantitative survey instrument was cognitively tested with 52 adult male and female respondents in India and West Bengal. And the results were used to assess respondent comprehension, retrieval, judgment, and response. And those results of the cognitive testing informed which version of the different modules in the WEFI and or which versions of the questions are used, as well as how to phrase questions better for respondents to improve their understanding. The qualitative tools have been derived from a range of different tools, which will be explained later further on in this presentation, which have been used across the CGIAR and in projects implemented by Kidd Royal Tropical Institute. But as a set, they have not been tested as a whole. So I'll now hand over to Katie to explain the quantitative methods of the WEFI.
Thanks, Rokie. There are 2 versions of the WEFI. There's the Pro-WEFI or project level WEFI and the A-WEFI, an abbreviated WEFI. And I'll just have you change the slide, please. Thank you. The Pro-WEFI includes 12 indicators and the A-WEFI includes 6 indicators. These are the first standardized versions that are available to both external and internal users who want to measure men's and women's empowerment in fisheries and aquaculture contexts. The WEFI is a survey-based instrument, so it's not based on aggregate statistics or secondary data, but rather it's constructed using interviews with primary male and female adults within the same household. It's an aggregate index composed of two parts, which are the domains of empowerment and gender parity index. And I'll get into that in a little bit later on. In terms of the scope, the WEFI focuses strictly on empowerment in aquaculture and fisheries, as well as agricultural contexts. And this is distinct from economic status, education, and empowerment in other areas, which are measured by other indices and indicators. And this is really to enable a clear analysis of the determinants of empowerment in aquaculture and fisheries contexts. So a woman or man is empowered if she or he achieves adequacy. So that means they meet a certain threshold for 75% of the Pro-WEFI indicators and 80% for the A-WEFI. The WEFI is an international survey instrument and provides room for local adaptation, so it can be used in a diversity of contexts. The WEFI can be used in a wide range of applications, including M&E, national surveys, impact evaluations, etc., to track and monitor, as well as to assess program impact on empowerment. So in terms of the structure of the two versions of the WEFI, it's very similar to that of the WEA in that it's comprised of both the domains of empowerment as well as the gender parity index. As I mentioned, there's two versions, the A-WEFI and the Pro-WEFI, and those generally align with the modules covered by the A-WEA and Pro-WEA. The A-WEFI only takes about 30 minutes to administer and captures 5 domains of empowerment, and those include production, resources, income, time, and leadership. The Pro-WEFI is longer to capture project level detail and allows for a number of optional questions that may be important to track for project purposes. And it's aligned based on 3 domains of empowerment, which include intrinsic, collective, and instrumental agency. And so the A-WEFI and Pro-WEFI retain the same questions as the A-WEA and Pro-WEA, but the activities, assets, etc., have been changed or added to reflect in aquaculture and fisheries context. So here you can see the Pro-WEFI and A-WEFI side by side. So as you can see, the Pro-WEFI covers intrinsic, instrumental, and collective agency over 12 indicators. Each of those indicators receives an equal proportion of the overall weight, so 1/12. And an individual is empowered if adequate in 75% of those indicators, so 8 of the 12 indicators. The A-WEFI, in contrast, has 6 indicators. Each domain, rather than each indicator, receives equal proportion of the overall weight, so 1/5. And an individual is empowered if he or she is adequate on 80% of those indicators, or 4 out of the 5 domains. You'll notice that the A-WEFI captures both collective and instrumental agency, but does not capture intrinsic agency, as it's a much shorter instrument. So the A-WEFI and Pro-WEFI index composition, again, mirrors the A-WEA and Pro-WEA index. And so the WEFI score ranges from 0 to 1, and higher values indicate greater levels of empowerment. And it's composed of, as I mentioned, the domains of empowerment as well as the gender parity index. So the domains of empowerment comprises 90% of the weight of the index and is a direct measure of women's empowerment in either those 3 domains for the Pro-WEFI or 5 domains for the A-WEFI. And the gender parity index comprises 10% of the weight of the index, and it assesses women's achievement relative to the primary male in the household. So that means it reflects the percentage of women who are empowered or who are as empowered as the men in their households. So here you can see the Pro-WEFI definitions of adequacy for the 12 indicators. These have the thresholds that are in the do file for the WEFI prep do file. There's a few differences from the WEA. So under the self-efficacy, the threshold was increased from 32 to 36, as there's one additional statement in the WEFI. Under the attitudes about domestic violence, there's 3 additional scenarios. So scenarios 6 through 8, as compared to the Pro-WEA, and these statements will be validated during the pilot phase of the work. And then finally, the access to and control over productive capital adds ponds, ownership of ponds, as well as access to gleaning areas as categories of adequacy on the indicator, in addition to land, which is what the WEA covers. And these categories will also be validated during the pilot phase of the project. So the A-WEA definitions of adequacy for those 6 indicators that the A-WEA covers, the A-WEFI covers, are the same as those in the Pro-WEFI, but I've just pulled them out here on a separate slide for ease of use. And these use the same thresholds as the Pro-WEA rather than the A-WEA. And this is because the A-WEA was an earlier version, and those indicators have since been improved upon. And so we wanted to use the most recent versions of those indicators in the A-WEFI. So how to calculate the WEFI, the quantitative data. So as I mentioned, at the highest level, the WEFI is a composite index comprised of the domains of empowerment, which comprise 90% of the weight of the index, as well as the gender parity index, which comprise 10% of the weight. And this results in a score between 0 and 1, with higher values indicating greater levels of empowerment. All the indicators are weighted equally for the Pro-WEFI, so 1/12, and all the domains are weighted equally for the A-WEA, so 1/5. The quantitative survey instrument is administered to both the primary male and female decision makers within the household, and the A-WEA instructional guide provides a lot of really detailed information about that. Then once the data is collected and cleaned, there is a prep do file followed by an analysis do file and stata that can be used to construct the WEFI, and the link to training videos in terms of how to do that is provided there. And now I'll turn it back over to Proje to go over the qualitative methods of the WEFI.
Thanks, Katie. So the qualitative methods of the WEFI were added for a number of reasons and have a number of purposes. So first of all, they serve to contextualize the WEFI survey questions. As Katie explained, there is a component of local contextualization that can be done in each country or for each project, and the qualitative tools can help to do that. In addition, the qualitative tools can help to gain a more in-depth understanding of the local context of women's empowerment and how that links with the different activities that a project has. Another reason to use the qualitative tools of the WEFI is for a qualitative evaluation of changes in empowerment. So comparing how people speak about empowerment in a baseline versus how they speak about that at the end of a project. And finally, it also helps to interpret certain findings of the WEFI retrospectively. So after you have calculated the index based before the project based on a baseline, and you have compared that to the same scores at the end of the project, doing some qualitative interpretations will really help you to understand what kind of changes have happened or what kind of backlash may have happened. So there is a guidance document that describes these different tools and how to use them, and they can be found in the link that you can find here on the slide. So how were the qualitative tools for the WEFI developed? So these tools are based on several other tools developed in different projects. And an important part of the guidance document and the protocol, it is really based on the Gender, Agriculture and Assets project, which is also on the WEA resources page. And in addition, we have used some other tools, for example, value chain analysis tools from the CTR research program on livestock and fish, and tools used for gendered aquaculture value chain analysis in Bangladesh, tools from Genovate, and tools from other projects in which the Kidd Royal Tropical Institute was involved. And in addition, there is a specific tool that is related to community-based fisheries management. This is something that is not yet in the WEFI index, but could be something that could be developed later on. So you will recognize this diagram from the slides that Katie just presented. It is different in two ways. First of all, you see the gray area here that highlights a number of general tools. And then there is another sort of separate component here, which relates to gender attitudes, which is a module that is still to be validated, but is also likely to be added to the quantitative index. So you will see that linked to these different indicators of the Pro-WEFI, there are a number of qualitative tools, which are highlighted in blue here. And then there are a number of more general questions that are related, or general tools that are related to the general context of the project and a general understanding of women's empowerment in a certain context. So when using the A-WEFI, and that also depends, of course, on resources of a particular project, the specific tools can be added that are linked to the A-WEFI indicators. So I will briefly go through each of the different tools, and all of this can again be found in the guiding notes for which the link was provided, and for which the link is also at the top of this slide. So first, I'll talk about the general tools. So the first is a community profile, which is really about eliciting social, economic, agricultural, and aquaculture and fisheries, and other background information about the community. So it's really about an understanding of the place in which a project takes place. The second is a tool for recognizing seasonality patterns. This is really about production calendars and how seasonal variations affect how women use their time, and men also use their time. And it provides the context for the time use indicator of the WEFI, whether it's a peak or a slack period in which the WEFI survey was done. So there's another tool, and there are actually two versions of that. One that is drawn from the GAP2 tools, and another one that is drawn from other sources, which is about gaining a local understanding of empowerment. Both elicit this understanding, but they do this in slightly different ways. And this will then also help to validate or contextualize the scores that you gain from the quantitative survey. There is also a tool that can be used for retrospection. So at the end of a project, to look at, with respondents, to look at the effects of a project intervention on women's empowerment. And then there is an optional life histories tool, which is another way of eliciting understanding and perceptions and experiences of women's empowerment within the context of a particular project. Another tool that can be useful is key informants of project staff. If you assume that those involved in collecting the quantitative and qualitative WEFI information are part of the project, then obviously this tool may be less necessary, but if externals collect this information, and this could be a useful tool to have. So this is really about the project and the communities and what the project intends to do and how this relates to women's empowerment. Then there is a tool about intra-household and community relationships, which is really, which first of all provides information for the list of indicators to include in the WEFI survey in the relational in the relationship module, but also generates an understanding of how these particular people and groups of people enable or block success in fisheries and aquaculture. Then there is a tool related to decision-making and control. And this is so where the quantitative survey measures the degree to which women and men have influence on decision-making. This provides you more insight in how decisions are being made at the household level, and also understand reasons for why these patterns of decision-making are there. Then there is a group membership tool, which is really about the different relevant groups in a community and how decisions are made in these groups that are relevant to the agriculture and fisheries project or the agriculture and fisheries activities, and understand again the reasons for gender patterns in decision making. And finally, and this is something that is not yet part of the WEFI, as I indicated, there is a tool that can be used for capture fisheries projects, in particular in relation to people's role and women's and men's role in fisheries management, and the decision making and voice that they have in fisheries management bodies. So apart from the tools, the guidance note also provides some guidance on how to implement each of these tools, with what kind of respondents to invite for this and how to implement it. And in addition, the guidance for the protocols for the GAP2 tools can also be viewed, which has much more detailed guidance. What is important is to really ensure that a social scientist is involved in the entire process of implementing it to really contextualize and link the different tools and ensure that this is done in a useful way. And then once data is collected, there are some general guidance about labeling of notes and full transcription of the interviews if that is possible. But there may also be circumstances where resources do not allow for it, and then at least detailed notes are needed. So as I indicated at the start, there are different purposes of using the qualitative tools. So how to analyze the data will depend on why you were collecting this information, and some guidance on how to analyze is also provided with each of the tools. A way to analyze qualitative data can be through using qualitative analysis software, such as, for example, NVivo and Atlas, and then using a coding scheme to do that. So once you have all this information from the quantitative and qualitative tools, how then do you bring these two methods together? So again, this really depends on the purpose of the analysis that you're doing. So if it is to answer certain questions about how to improve empowerment, it may be different than for when you are doing a baseline, an endline, or an impact assessment of your particular project. So as indicated, in some cases, the qualitative tools are really providing inputs into the quantitative survey. So then this is really something that you do at the start, and that's how you bring the two together. And in other cases, the scores can be examined together with the qualitative results to understand why the results are as they are in relation to women's empowerment, and to identify any inconsistency between the two tools, because that is also possible, of course. And qualitative results can also support the identification of key areas to address in order to achieve a higher score. In other words, the types of interventions to conduct to improve empowerment. So finally, we just want to look a bit ahead. With regards to the future plans for the quantitative WEFI tool, as Katie already indicated, the Pro-WEFI will test several additional modules in 2022, so this year, as part of the validation component of the survey development. And it may mean that because there's still some pilot testing that will go on, the final versions of the WEFI may slightly differ from the information that was just presented here in this presentation. The Pro-WEFI pilot testing will test 3 additional indicators. The first is attitudes about gender roles, which I already mentioned. A second one is access to information extension services, and a third one is about nutrition and health. Which are also based on those developed as part of the optional modules for the Proje. Then for the qualitative WEFI tools, so these will be pilot tested in early 2022. These have not been pilot tested as a package yet, as I indicated, and they will be revised based on that pilot test. While there is a guidance note, now there will be a more detailed guideline that will then be developed that explains the tools and how to contextualize and implement them and analyze and use the results. And as for the quantitative survey and because they will still be pilot tested, the final version may differ a little bit from the information presented here. So finally, some links to some additional resources to help further understanding of the WEFI, which includes a number of WEA resources, the Generate resources, and then some other a conceptual model for women and girls empowerment that really sort of talks about how to measure women's empowerment and how these different concepts are conceptualized. And finally, there is a resource which regards gender integration and intersectionality in food systems research, which has a strong focus on fisheries and aquaculture as well. So finally, we would like to thank everyone that has contributed to these slides, and for further questions, we point you to the WorldFish website. Thank you very much for your attention.